The birth of a dynasty, Florida, 1946. The war was over, but America was still haunted by what it had seen. Bodies torn apart by bullets, men returning home missing limbs, eyes, or sanity, in a country trying to rebuild. The freak show became a mirror. It told people that deformity could be entertainment, that difference could be sold, that pain could wear a smile. And in the heart of this strange new world, a dynasty was born, the Stiles and Ward families. By the late 1940s, traveling carnivals were the last remnants of a vanishing America, a country of rails and roadside towns where entertainment came to you once a year and left dust and music in its wake. On those dusty lots, amid the smell of sawdust and popcorn, audiences would gather to see what they called the wonders of the world. Two-headed calves, fire breathers, tattooed women, and then came the born different, people whose bodies told stories no fiction could match. The Stiles family entered the scene quietly, descendants of Pennsylvania showmen. They carried a hereditary condition known as ectrodactyly, the lobster-clawed deformity that fused fingers and toes into pincer-like shapes. For most, it was tragedy. For the Stiles, it became a brand. The family patriarch, Grady Stiles Sr., understood showmanship. He dressed his son in striped suits, sat him on velvet chairs, and charged 25 cents per photograph. The boy's hands were the attraction, strange, elegant, horrifying. They called him the Lobster Boy. Crowds gasped, children cried, and the Stiles made money. At the same time, another troupe was touring the same Florida fairgrounds, the Ward family, a line of performers known for their daring stunts and physical extremes. They weren't deformed, they were self-made freaks, fire eaters, sword swallowers, contortionists. Their matriarch, Ethel Ward, had once walked the high wire under the name the Iron Lady. Her husband, a tattooed ex-sailor, performed the Man of 1,000 Needles act. Their children were raised among tents, smoke, and applause, born into the rhythm of applause and departure. It was only a matter of time before the two families met. The Stiles and the Wards traveled the same routes: Florida, Georgia, Alabama, the small towns that still paid a nickel to see the impossible. They set up side by side, competing for attention. But competition turned to camaraderie, camaraderie to familiarity, and familiarity to love. HTTPS, old carnival workers still tell the story. One summer night in 1950, under the Ferris wheel lights of the Sarasota Fair, Grady Stiles Sr. and Ethel Ward shook hands on a deal that would change their bloodlines forever. The Stiles had the deformity. The Wards had the discipline. Together, they would build a circus empire of human anomaly. By day, they performed. By night, they drank, argued, and planned. Their shows became family affairs, a traveling clan of cousins, lovers, and children, all bound by spectacle. They called it the Stiles and Ward Sideshow Review. The posters promised the world's most extraordinary family. And in a way, they weren't lying. Then, the freak show industry thrived on contradictions. Exploitation disguised as wonder. Empathy disguised as curiosity. Behind every smile was a bruise. Behind every laugh, a bottle. The Stiles and Ward families learned early that fame and cruelty often shared the same tent. By the mid-1950s, their names were synonymous with the Florida carnival scene. The Stiles for their shocking deformities, the Wards for their charisma and control. Together, they became what journalists would later call the freak show dynasty. Their children inherited both, the deformity and the stage. Born into applause, raised under the lights, they never knew where the act ended and life began. According to official records, the narrator would say, the Stiles and Ward families found success in the post-war carnival boom. But those who traveled with them knew the truth. They weren't just performing the grotesque. They were living it. The Carnival Kingdom. By the mid-1950s, the state of Florida had become the warm-blooded heart of America's strangest empire. Every winter, when the northern carnivals closed and the tents came down, the performers migrated south, not to rest, but to live. They came in caravans, wagons, and old trucks, bringing with them lions, calliope organs, and the echoes of laughter that didn't sound quite human. Near Tampa, Gibsonton. Here, a few square miles of humid land, lined with palm trees and rusting trailers, the freaks found a home. Gibsonton, or Gibtown, as the locals called it, was no ordinary town. The post office had a separate counter for dwarfs. The police chief was a former Sideshow strongman. You could walk down the street and see the human blockhead buying groceries beside the bearded lady, while the fat lady ran a diner that served pancakes the size of tires. And in one modest trailer near the river lived the first family of the carnival world, the Stiles and the Wards. Their lot was easy to spot. A large canvas tent stood permanently erected beside the trailer, its faded lettering still promising, strange but true. Children played on the lawn, some on crutches, others crawling happily through the grass. From a distance, it looked almost idyllic, a place where the outsiders of the world could finally belong. But inside the tent, the old rules of the road still applied. The show never ended, and no one ever left. The Stiles family had grown in number. Grady Stiles Sr. and his wife now managed bookings for several traveling troupes. His son, Grady Jr., born with the same ectrodactyly deformity, had already become a headline act. Across the street, the Ward family ran a competing exhibit, a mix of human curiosities, acrobats, and fire dancers. Rather than rivals, they became collaborators. When one show closed, the other opened. When one performer got sick, the other took their place. The two families merged into a single machine, a dynasty built on spectacle. They didn't just live off the carnival, they were the carnival. By the 1960s, their combined influence reached across the East Coast. Promoters referred to them as the freak show royalty. They ran acts from New York to Miami, training new performers, teaching them how to charm, how to terrify, how to control a crowd's sympathy like pulling strings. The motto painted on their trucks read, "Born different, built for the stage." But Gibtown had its secrets. Behind the laughter and neon lights was a darker intimacy. The performers didn't just work together. They lived, loved, and fought within the same few blocks. Marriages were arranged for publicity, broken for jealousy, then patched together again for ticket sales. Children were born into the act before they ever understood what it meant to be human outside of applause. Among those children were Grady Stiles Jr. and a young woman from the Ward line named Maria Ward, who would later marry into the Stiles family. Together, they represented the new generation, the merger of deformity and performance, blood and business. Their union would later become the seed of tragedy that ended the dynasty itself. But in the 1960s, it was still a fairy tale, the kind that looked beautiful from the audience and rotten from backstage. Old carnival workers remember that time with nostalgia and fear. They called Gibtown the Circus of the Dead, not because of ghosts, but because everyone there had built their lives around things that couldn't survive outside the tent. Freak shows were dying. The world was changing. Television had made curiosity cheap. Science had turned deformity from a mystery into a diagnosis. And yet, the Stiles and Wards clung to the old ways. They weren't entertainers anymore. They were the last living symbols of a vanished America, a family trying to keep a dying art alive by sacrificing itself to it. According to official records, the narrator would say, "Gibsonton was a haven for performers, a sanctuary of acceptance. But those who lived there knew better. It was a kingdom built on sorrow, ruled by blood, and held together by applause." Grady Stiles Sr. and the Curse of the Claw. Before there was a Lobster boy, there was a man who learned to turn pain into profit. Grady Stiles Sr., patriarch of the Stiles family, was the first to transform a genetic curse into a family business. Born in Pittsburgh in the early 1900s with ectrodactyly, a congenital malformation that fused his fingers and toes into sharp, claw-like shapes, Grady Sr. discovered early that the world would either pity him or pay him. He chose the latter. By his teenage years, he was performing in sideshows as Lobster Man. He wore suits tailored to expose his hands, posed for photographs, and let people gawk. The act was simple, but it worked. Freaks drew crowds, and unlike many of his peers, Grady Sr. realized that deformity could be inherited. If he built a family, he could build an empire. When he married his first wife, a small, quiet woman from the Ward performance circuit, the union wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. Together, they represented two bloodlines of spectacle, one born of biology, the other of performance. Their children, he believed, would embody both. And when Grady Jr. was born in 1937 with the same lobster-like claws, the prophecy was fulfilled. "He looked like me," Grady Sr. would later boast. "I knew he was meant for the stage." The family leaned into the deformity. They rehearsed together, traveled together, and promoted their lineage as a miracle of nature. Audiences were told they were seeing not just one anomaly, but an entire dynasty. The Stiles name became synonymous with the strange, the grotesque, and the profitable. By the 1940s, Grady Sr. was touring with the Ringling Brothers, billed as the Lobster family. Their posters showed smiling faces, waving claws, and the promise of something that no movie or magazine could replicate, a living glimpse into the impossible. Behind the canvas, however, the reality was harsher. The money was good, but it came at the cost of dignity. Spectators mocked them, prodded them, sometimes threw things. To cope, Grady Sr. drank, and when he drank, he turned violent. The Stiles household was a carnival even off the road, loud, unpredictable, and soaked in whiskey. The children learned early that applause came with bruises. When Grady Sr. wasn't performing, he was brooding, convinced the world owed him respect for his suffering. He demanded discipline, obedience, and loyalty. His deformity gave him power. His fame gave him arrogance. He believed the Stiles were chosen, both cursed and divine. Neighbors in Gibtown would later recall seeing him crawl down the street on his hands, pulling his body along with raw strength, shouting at strangers who dared to stare. He said God made him this way so people would remember his name, one old carny remembered, and we do. But with each new generation, the curse deepened. The deformity passed from father to son, a grotesque inheritance carried like a badge of honor. Grady Sr. framed it as destiny, a divine mark that made them unique. A lie he repeated until it became truth. By the time he was too old to perform, his son had already become the face of the freak show era. Grady Stiles Jr., the Lobster Boy. In the 1950s, television brought the sideshow into living rooms. Producers loved the Stiles family, their look, their legend, their perfect combination of shock and sympathy. They were invited onto talk shows, interviewed for magazines. America was fascinated by them, not just as performers, but as proof that humanity could survive anything, even its own mutations. But behind the smiles and rehearsed jokes, the same sickness that had haunted the father began to bloom in the son. The addiction, the rage, the need for control. The curse of the claw wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Each generation bore it deeper. By the late 1950s, Grady Sr. had grown sickly and reclusive, rarely leaving his trailer in Gibtown. He spoke often of God, of destiny, of how fame had made and destroyed him. On his deathbed, he allegedly told his son, "The world will never stop looking at us. Make them pay for every glance." Grady Jr. took those words to heart, and the world would pay dearly. According to official records, the narrator would say, Grady Stiles Sr. died a performer and a patriarch. But those who knew him say his true legacy wasn't fame. It was the belief that suffering could be inherited, and that the family name was the price of survival. Love and the Sideshow. By the early 1960s, the freak show was fading, but love, or something that looked like it, still sold tickets. The crowds were smaller now, the curiosity dulled by television and modern medicine. But under the carnival tents of Florida, the Stiles and Ward families clung to the only world they knew, the world of spectacle, lights, and secrets whispered behind the curtain. It was there, in the dim glow of a midway in Sarasota, that Grady Stiles Jr. met Maria Ward. She was young, beautiful, and born into the same life of sawdust and gasoline. Her parents, longtime fire eaters and contortionists, had toured with the Stiles family years before. The two lineages had shared stages, trailers, and debts, and now fate seemed determined to intertwine them once again. Grady was already a star. His lobster-like hands, his charisma, and his biting sense of humor made him a natural performer. But fame had also hardened him. He drank too much, barked orders at fellow performers, and bragged that no one could touch a Stiles. Maria, graceful and naive, mistook his confidence for strength. She saw the tragic hero the crowd saw, the man who turned deformity into destiny. And when he looked at her, she believed it. A Pole State, that's where they shared cigarettes, late-night whiskey, and stories of wanting a life beyond the carnival. Grady promised her one. He said he would leave the road, buy a small home in Gibtown, and raise a family that didn't have to perform. But promises in the carnival world were written in smoke. In 1963, they married in a sideshow ceremony, surrounded by fellow performers. The bearded lady was maid of honor. The human cannonball served as best man. The wedding photos, still preserved in private collections, show Grady in a sharp gray suit, Maria in a simple white dress, and behind them, a hand-painted banner that read, "The greatest love on earth." The audience cheered. The show went on. And so did the curse. At first, the marriage seemed charmed. They performed together, Maria introducing him on stage, calling him the amazing Lobster Man, the eighth wonder of the world. Audiences loved their chemistry. Off stage, though, Grady's temper began to show. He drank heavily, berated Maria for small mistakes, and insisted on controlling every detail of their act. He couldn't walk, one carnival worker later said, but he could crawl faster than you'd believe, especially when he was angry. The violence escalated quietly behind closed trailer doors. Maria covered the bruises, smiled for the cameras, and told people she had fallen during rehearsal. To outsiders, they were still the perfect couple, the tragic beauty and her tortured genius. By the late 1960s, they had 2 children, both born with ectrodactyly. Their son, Grady III, inherited his father's sharp jawline and clawed hands. Their daughter, Donna, had milder deformities, but enough to be marketable. The carnival posters now featured the whole family, the Lobster family, 3 generations of living wonders. They performed in front of gasping crowds, smiling through the horror, laughing through the pity. The children learned to pose for photos before they learned to write their names. It was the Stiles way, to turn pain into a paycheck. But Maria's dream of leaving the carnival faded quickly. The show was the only life Grady knew, and he wasn't about to trade adoration for obscurity. He told her, "Without the stage, we're nothing. The crowd makes us real." By then, he was already drinking daily, crawling through the house with a bottle in one hand and a cigarette in the other. His anger became legend in Gibtown, the kind of anger that could silence an entire bar. He would slam his clawed fists on the counter and boast, "They call me a freak, but I'm the one people pay to see." Maria endured it, for the children, for the name, for the myth of the dynasty. But the show that once made them famous had begun to rot from within. And the audience that once applauded would soon bear witness to the unraveling of the most infamous love story in carnival history. According to official records, the narrator would say, Grady and Maria Stiles were a marriage made in the Midway, a union of blood, fame, and illusion. But those who knew them backstage say it was never love that kept them together. It was the performance. Grady Jr., the Lobster Boy, rises. He was born into applause. The moment Grady Stiles Jr. opened his eyes in 1937, his father lifted him before a crowd of carnival workers and declared, "He's one of us." Tiny, malformed hands, perfect, symmetrical claws, sealed his fate before he could speak. He was not a child, he was an heir to the dynasty of deformity. By the time Grady Jr. could sit upright, he was already part of the act. His father dressed him in a sailor suit, taught him how to wave with his twisted hands, and drilled into him a lesson that would define his life. The world will never love you unless it fears you first. Growing up in the Sideshow meant growing up in captivity. Every day was performance, every smile rehearsed. Grady Jr. learned how to crawl across the stage with uncanny speed, balancing his small frame on his hands and elbows, spinning in circles for the gasping crowd. He discovered that cruelty could silence pity. If someone laughed too loudly, he'd lunge toward them, snapping his claws in mock attack. The audience would shriek. He'd grin. They called him the Lobster Boy. The name stuck like a scar. But behind the curtain, there was no laughter. His father's fame had become bitterness. Grady Sr. drank heavily, beating his son when he missed cues or talked back. When reporters came for interviews, he'd boast about their family gift, calling it the Stiles blessing. After they left, the house would go silent until the next bottle shattered. Grady Jr. came of age in a world where cruelty was currency. By the 1950s, he had grown strong. Upper body like iron, his arms thick from years of crawling and lifting himself without legs. He was handsome in a strange way. Square jaw, slicked hair, piercing eyes. Audiences adored him. He could charm women, terrify men, and silence an entire crowd with a single stare. He had inherited not only his father's deformity, but his cunning. He understood the economy of attention, that pity could be manipulated, that fascination could be monetized. Soon, he was touring independently, promoted as the Lobster Boy, the last true freak of the American Midway. He posed for photographers, smiled for reporters, and drank with anyone who would buy him around. But the fame only magnified the darkness. A prosody rate -5%, pitch and volume highlight. Grady Jr. had become notorious in the carnival circuit for his temper. He was quick to rage, even quicker to violence. When drunk, which was often, he would challenge able-bodied men to fights and win. Crawling on his arms with frightening speed, he'd tackle opponents to the ground, his clawed hands gripping like iron. He took pride in his power, telling friends, "I might not walk, but I can kill." In 1959, during a carnival in Ohio, he attacked a drunk spectator who had mocked him. The man survived, but only barely. The police called it self-defense. Grady called it a lesson. It was around this time that the Ward family re-entered his life. Their daughter, Maria Ward, now a teenager, had grown up watching Grady perform. She admired his strength, mistook his arrogance for confidence, his cruelty for charisma. When she joined the Stiles show as an assistant, the attraction was immediate and disastrous. Marriage followed, then children, and for a brief moment, it looked like redemption. The Stiles family became a living symbol of freak show resilience. They were interviewed for TV, photographed for tabloids, America's most extraordinary family. The headlines read, but behind the glossy images, the violence continued. Grady drank, cursed, and controlled. He terrified his children, bullied fellow performers, and claimed the spotlight even in small-town bars. He would flex his claws and say, "I was born a freak, but I'm more man than any of you." In time, the name Lobster Boy became infamous not as a curiosity, but as a warning. To the carnival world, he was legend. To his family, he was a nightmare. By the 1970s, the freak show era was dying. The civil rights movement and disability reform laws had made sideshows socially unacceptable. But Grady refused to fade. He performed in underground fairs, private shows, even biker rallies, anywhere people would pay to stare. He didn't care about the money. He cared about the control. Those who met him in those years describe a man caught between myth and misery. He saw himself as royalty, the last true freak, and ruled over his shrinking world with an iron claw. His wife feared him. His children avoided him. And yet, he couldn't stop performing. According to official records, the narrator would say, Grady Stiles Jr. was celebrated as America's last living carnival legend. But those who shared his home called him something else entirely. The curse that refused to die. The dark years. By the 1970s, the carnival lights were dimming. What had once been America's grand parade of the strange was collapsing under the weight of modernity and morality. Freak shows were being outlawed. Television had replaced the tent. Curiosity had become cruelty. And in Gibtown, the fabled kingdom of circus misfits, the Stiles family sat in the ruins of what had once been their empire. The freak show dynasty was dying. But Grady Stiles Jr. refused to let it go. Afterwards, the years had not been kind to him. He was now in his 40s, heavier, angrier, and nearly always drunk. He performed occasionally at small-town carnivals, his act reduced to nostalgia, the original Lobster boy alive. The audiences came less for wonder and more for pity. They would point, whisper, and walk away shaking their heads. And every time they did, the rage inside him grew louder. At home, Grady had become a tyrant. His strength, once the source of awe, was now a weapon. He ruled his wife Maria and their children through fear, alternating between violent outbursts and tearful apologies. He would drink through the night, drag himself across the floor on his powerful arms, and shout, "You think you can run from me? You can't run from what you are." His children learned early that there was no safe corner in the trailer. The sound of his metal braces scraping against the floor was the signal to hide. When he was sober, he could be charming, telling stories about the old days on the road, the applause, the fame. But when the bottle came out, the stories turned into accusations. The dynasty that once dazzled America had become a prison with a family name. By the late 1970s, Grady's violence escalated beyond the home. Neighbors in Gibtown began to whisper about what they'd seen. Broken furniture, screams at midnight, police cars parked in the sand. No one interfered. Everyone knew the Stiles family. Everyone knew Grady, and everyone was afraid of him. He had learned to use his deformity as a shield. "Go ahead," he'd tell officers who tried to arrest him. "Put the handcuffs on." They never did. The courts were sympathetic. Judges saw a disabled man and refused to jail him. When he was charged with assault, the cases were dropped. When he was accused of abuse, the witnesses stayed silent. Grady had become untouchable, the Lobster boy immune to the law. Above the silence, in 1978, the curse of a Stiles family reached its breaking point. Grady's eldest daughter, Donna, had fallen in love with a young man, an outsider, a carny worker with no deformities. Grady hated him. He said no normal man would ever marry into the Stiles bloodline. When Donna refused to end the relationship, Grady made a promise. "If he comes near this family again, I'll kill him." Weeks later, on the night before the wedding, Grady kept his word. He pulled a gun from his lap, aimed and fired twice. The young man fell dead on the porch. Grady didn't run. He didn't hide. When the police arrived, he smiled and said, "I told you I'd do it," his twisted hands resting neatly on his lap. He admitted everything. "Yes," he said, "I killed him. But tell me, what kind of man could stop me?" The jury convicted him of third-degree murder. But when sentencing came, the judge declared that prison facilities could not accommodate his disability. Grady was given 15 years probation and released. He returned home to Gibtown a free man, and more dangerous than ever. Opera. The following decade was a blur of decay. The carnival industry continued to crumble. The Ward family splintered. Some turned to normal work. Others disappeared. The Stiles family became an urban legend, whispered about by Florida locals as the cursed family by the river. Tourists would sometimes drive through Gibtown, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Lobster boy sitting on his porch, cigarette glowing in the dark. Break time 380. Those who did said it was like seeing a ghost. Grady sat alone most nights, staring at the swamp, muttering to himself. The gun still within reach. The dynasty that had once ruled the carnival now existed only in stories. Stories of deformity, and the kind of fame that eats its own bloodline alive. According to official records, the narrator would say the Lobster Boy served no time for murder. But those who lived in his shadow knew that the sentence had already begun. The slow death of a family that once made the world stare. The murder of Lobster Boy, November 29, 1992. The air in Gibtown was heavy with salt and humidity, the kind of Florida night that makes even silence sweat. Inside a small trailer near the Alafia River, Grady Stiles Jr., the man the world called Lobster Boy, sat in his armchair, drinking gin and watching television. It was just after midnight when the last act of the freak show dynasty began. For decades, Grady had been the undisputed tyrant of his family, feared by his wife Maria, his children, and even his neighbors. He'd beaten them, threatened them, and reminded them daily that he had killed once before and walked free. Now, years later, he was telling them again, "I'm the devil himself," he boasted, tapping his twisted claw against a bottle, "and the devil don't die." Maria believed him. She had tried to leave before, only to be dragged back, both by fear and by guilt. Their children had grown up under constant threat. Grady's eldest son, Grady III, drank to forget. His daughter Donna carried trauma like a scar that never faded. The Stiles home had become a stage of terror, its every night ending in violence. But this time, Maria was done being part of the show. She turned to a young man named Harry Glenn Newman Jr., a friend of her son's, a drifter and carnival worker who'd been dating Donna. He'd seen the bruises, the fear, the quiet desperation. And, when Maria whispered, "He's going to kill us," Newman didn't hesitate. They agreed on a plan, crude, desperate, final. The price, $1,500. The motive, survival. A separation. That night, as Grady sat watching TV, the trailer door opened quietly. Maria was in the next room, pretending to sleep. Newman stepped inside, gun in hand, a .32 caliber pistol. He aimed at the back of the man who had terrorized an entire family for decades. He fired 2 shots. The first hit Grady in the head. The second hit him in the chest. He never moved again. When police arrived, they found Lobster Boy still sitting upright in his chair, eyes open, cigarette smoldering in an ashtray. The television was still on, a rerun of a Circus documentary flickering on the screen. Beside him lay a half-empty bottle of gin, and on the floor, his famous hands still curled into the shape of claws. The news spread across America like wildfire. "The murder of Lobster Boy," screamed the headlines. TV stations replayed old footage of Grady performing under the carnival tent, smiling for the cameras. They called it a tragedy, a family curse, a modern-day freak show murder. But for those who lived in Gibtown, it wasn't tragedy, it was deliverance. The town that had once feared the Lobster Boy finally exhaled. No one celebrated, but no one mourned. When the police questioned Maria, she didn't lie. "I asked him to do it," she said. "He was going to kill us all." Her voice, calm and steady, carried no remorse, only exhaustion. The trial became a media circus, a grotesque reflection of the carnival world that had created them. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Tabloids ran side-by-side photos of Grady's monstrous hands and Maria's tear-streaked face. The story was too good to resist. The man born a freak, the family born in fear. The wife who hired a killer to end the show. Prosecutors charged Maria with manslaughter, her son Glenn as an accomplice, and Newman with first-degree murder. But when the jury heard the details, the abuse, the violence, the terror, sympathy shifted. One juror reportedly said, "We weren't judging a murder. We were judging a survival." In the end, the verdicts shocked everyone. Maria Stiles, sentenced to 12 years probation. Glenn Stiles, also probation. Harry Glenn Newman Jr., 27 years in prison. None of them denied their part. And yet, the courtroom erupted in quiet applause when Maria walked free. When the funeral came, few attended. No circus banners, no cameras. Just a coffin lowered into Florida sand, and a modest headstone that read, Grady F. Stiles Jr., the Lobster Man. No epitaph, no quote, just a name that had terrified a town and fascinated a nation. That night, a storm rolled in over Gibsonton. Locals claimed lightning struck near the river, right where the old Stiles trailer had once stood. Some said it was coincidence. Others swore it was retribution. The sound of the carnival finally taking back its own. According to official records, the narrator would say, Grady Stiles Jr. died at the hands of his own family. But those who remember him say he died the same way he lived, as part of the show. Legacy of the Freak Show. The carnival lights have long gone out. The tents that once trembled with gasps and laughter have collapsed into dust. And yet, if you drive through Gibsonton, Florida, on a foggy evening, you can still feel the echo, a faint shimmer of applause carried on the wind, a ghost of a spotlight that refuses to die. This was once the kingdom of the strange, the final refuge of the unwanted, the forgotten, the extraordinary. And at its center stood one family whose story defined both the beauty and the horror of the Sideshow era. The Stiles and the Wards, America's freak show dynasty. After Grady Stiles Jr.'s death, the dynasty crumbled for good. His wife, Maria, moved away quietly, avoiding interviews, living out her remaining years in anonymity. His children scattered across the country, some changing their names entirely, others hiding in plain sight. A few tried to carry on the legacy, performing at small fairs or freak show revival acts. But the world had changed. There was no longer an audience for deformity, only documentaries, gossip, and whispered fascination. The freak show, as an institution, was dead. But the fascination with human oddity never truly went away. It just changed form. Reality television, tabloid culture, the internet, new arenas for voyeurism. Still trading on the same currency the Stiles and Ward families had once built their empire on, the spectacle of pain. To historians, the Stiles family became a footnote, the tragic climax of America's carnival age. To the people of Gibsonton, they were a ghost story, a reminder of what happens when the show never ends. And to the descendants who still carry the genetic mark of ectrodactyly, they are both curse and inheritance, proof that some stories cannot be buried. In the years following Grady's murder, journalists descended on Gibsonton looking for answers. They found rusting trailers, faded banners, and an aging population of retired performers who spoke of the Stiles name with both reverence and dread. One of them, a bearded contortionist named Jimmy the Twist, said, "You have to understand, Gibtown wasn't hell. It was home. We weren't monsters, just people trying to turn pain into a living." Grady, he just forgot to stop performing. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. The Stiles family wasn't cursed by deformity. They were cursed by the applause, by a world that saw them not as human beings, but as curiosities. The freak show had given them food, fame, and identity, and then devoured them whole. Today, Gibsonton is quieter. The old carnival lots have been paved over. The midway rides sit in storage, their paint peeling, their laughter replaced by the buzz of cicadas. But some of the old performers still live there, elderly, broken, yet unwilling to leave. They call the place Showtown. They still gather at the local bar, swapping stories that sound like myths. The fire eater who set his tent ablaze, a giant who lived in a house built for two, and the boy with claws who could crawl faster than anyone could run. At the far end of town, near a patch of swamp where the palms grow thick, lies the grave of Grady Stiles Jr. It's unmarked now. Vandals took the headstone years ago, but people still visit. Some leave flowers, others leave coins, and sometimes, late at night, locals claim they hear scratching near the grave, like metal scraping against earth. They say it's the Lobster Boy, still performing for the dark. The world that created the Stiles and Ward families no longer exists, and yet in many ways, it never really left. We still watch, we still stare, we still turn other people's pain into stories, just as the crowds once did beneath the big top. The difference is, now we call it content. The freak show didn't die, it evolved. According to official records, the narrator would say, the last generation of America's sideshow families retired by the late 1980s. But those who walk the quiet streets of Gibtown after dusk swear they can still hear the echo of the calliope, a slow, sad tune playing for no one at all. The dynasty is gone, the legacy remains, the show never ends.